Rick is a newbie adventurer, which is a little odd considering his age. He is basically an isekai Goku, doing Saitama's training to reach S rank. Little did that world know, the S stood for strength beyond common sense and logic. The journey starts as Rick is being trained by his seniors to death for an E rank exam. The party members gloat about his improvement, but he believes there's still room for improvement. Some days later, Rick goes to the registration booth, and the receptionist, Elisa, turns out to be his ex-coworker. The duo catch up, and Rick tells her that he is a bit embarrassed to become an adventurer at 32. Suddenly, a drunkard comes up and harasses Elisa by telling her that she's a woman and needs to shut up. Rick, who's also a feminist, tells him to calm down, but just casually wrecks him. He then says that alcohol is bad as a crowd gathers and takes his exam ticket with the unlucky number of 4242. Rick is worried when the very hot and very calm elf Rionette asks him if he's registered, but he cannot make eye contact. To escape the Gunnar allegations, he yaps on about teenage dreams, but she questions if that dream also involves looking at her honkers. Meanwhile, at the reception, the drunkard turns out to be an A-ranker with assault charges on his rap sheet. But the crowd is more amazed by Rick's hand imprint on his steel armor. During the physical exam, the doctor is surprised by his age. He also cracks the man a crystal ball despite getting a low measurement. The first examination involves hitting a slime punching bag that measures their offense. Rick remembers training by punching a golden slime 50,000 times a day. After a few examinees, Bullcut is asked to show his offense, who is supposedly a family prodigy. Despite the glazing and the zesty power-up, he attacks with a fire smaller than Rick's left nut but still impresses everyone. Rick remembers his training with nuclear bombs but still gets on his knees to glaze Bullcut, believing he's holding back. After some more examinees, Rick is up next. The examiner, though, asks him to step down due to his age. He then remembers his grueling boxing sessions while listening to KSI's music before questioning why age has to determine everything. He charges and punches the bag so hard that it disintegrates, but he thinks that the bag is defective. He scares everyone, though, including Bullcut, but Bully still believes that he has the upper hand in defense. In the defense test, Bullhead realizes that this is not his anime as Rick tires out the examiner with first-level magic. He asks the examiner to go easy, who takes offense as Rick has super precise mana control. The examiner then attacks him with a fifth nature magic, but Rick manages to block it easily. This clash of magic levels brings Sir Sylvester to the exam ground, who is shocked to learn about Rick and his age. Later, Rick is sitting with Rionette after his written test, but is worried if he'll pass the first round. Bullcut gets there and screams at him for stealing his thunder and cries. His sister Angelica introduces herself and accuses Rick of being at the Diddy parties, but Rick is more offended by getting mistaken for being in his 40s. Angelica throws off her glove and he picks it up for his edging session later, but this is seen as accepting her duel, with Angelica setting up the terms as the loser being the winner's servant. Rick also learns that she's a B rank and is scared, but Rionette reminds him of his training under the notorious Orichalcum Fist. After puking, he clears his fears and steps up for his battle. Angelica is cocky as she's earned her nickname of Lightspeed, but Rick discovers she doesn't even measure his fraction. He begins to believe that he may be strong, but Angelica uses her special technique, tripping on rocks, to make him doubtful again. Being a dumbass, she screams how her next move is thrice as fast. Rick is even dumber though, as despite seeing how slow she is, he believes she'll do something special. She tries to end the duel, and Rick sees it as a strong offense. So, he punches really hard to the point of forming a crater. Angelica survives thanks to her rock tripping and surrenders before running away.
Not bad, not bad.
After Rick remembers the terms of the winner. He feels undeserving of his victory, but gets more worried after finding that his seniors are coming to visit him. The next day, Rick imagines marrying Rionette while waiting for the results, but she warns that his training will triple if he fails. He then finds that he has passed after his ticket shows blue mana. On their way out, Raster Diarmit, or Northy, introduces himself to Rionette as some noble jackass. He then proposes to her to be his second wife while calling Rick middle-aged. Rick then intervenes by calling her his girlfriend. Northy doesn't believe him, especially after finding out he's F rank. He then shows them that he's A ranked, and after belittling Rick, asks Rionette to come with him. Rionette, though, shoves her honkers on Rick and tells Northy he smells like shit. Raster feels humiliated and leaves after warning Rick to beware if he becomes the examiner for Rick's exam. She then thanks him for saving her. Northy goes to the bar to drink his humiliation away when suddenly his siblings, Bullcut and Angelica, come to him crying. They tell him about their encounters with Rick, and he brews something sinister after finding out it's the same person from before. Meanwhile, Rick is scared that Northy will be his examiner, but Rionette asks him to hold back if he is. Suddenly, Lynx introduces himself as his examiner, which makes him happy. Lynx then tells him that he's a middle-aged icon who hasn't let his age stop him. After telling him that he's also similar to Rick, he shakes his hand before getting to prepare for the exams. All this while, Raster is listening on before asking Lynx to lend an ear on the stairs. In the locker room, Rick is glowing due to the current turn of events. Suddenly, everyone learns that Lynx is sick, and Raster is taking over their examination. Rick pisses his pants, only to find that Bullcut and Angelica are his siblings. He also overhears from the others that Raster is known as the F Rank Crusher, which makes him shit his pants, as he knows Raster is going to do more than crushing when it comes to him. After changing his pants, Rick panics as he will die either at the hands of Raster or from his triple training. He then tells Rionette that people's negative perception of him makes him insecure, so she flips the script and motivates him to win. Suddenly, a kid in a cloak, who's definitely not Bullcut, appears to do some fortune reading for him. Rick, being the Isekai Goku, falls into an obvious trap and gets transported. Rionette, who could have stopped him, gets pissed and threatens to remove Bully's eyeballs. He then tells her that he's not teleported too far. Rick ends up behind the academy and is cornered by the Diamond guards, all are B rank and above. After telling him that they'll put him to sleep, Rick loses hope when suddenly his squad pulls up. Rick tries to avoid trouble by saying that the guards are helping him train. One of the bigger guards tries to attack Brodston only to get his hands crushed. He then heals it after learning it's his gooning hand. Mizette knows that Rick has got into trouble and whips out his new American toy and explains what it holds before firing it at the guards. Rick is scolding him when suddenly a guard holds Alice Arrett hostage, which makes everyone worried for him. Rick tells her that they're playing around, which gets her excited, but the guard tells her to shut up. So, she shuts them up instead. The butler explains who they are, and that they mean business. He then decides to retire as his eyes have witnessed tranquility. As Alice Rhett plays with the guards, Rick runs inside. Rionette asks Bully about Rick's state, and he gloats that he might never be back, only for Rick to get there. She then yeets a shocked Bully and plasters him to the wall face first, which somehow does not kill him. Lynx gets there and warns Rick to withdraw after telling him how Raster beat him and trash-talked his dream. Rick, though, assures that he'll win. Raster learns that his guards have failed him and gets on to preparing in the arena. Rick heads there with a serious look on his face to the point of changing his art style. The exam goes on as Raster is easily flaming his way through. Adolf, not the Austrian one, explains that Raster has a pretty big power level using his eyes. He then almost gets blinded after seeing Rick. At the stands, Rionette's and Elisa's blinkers introduce themselves to one another. Rionette invites her to watch with her squad, but gets her away from Mizet as he's an expert honker enthusiast.
What the fuck are you looking at?
Elisa is worried for Rick, but everyone assures he'll be fine. The two competitors get ready, but Rick asks him his reasons for becoming an adventurer. Raster tells him that it's just for the sake of his noble prestige and attacks him first. Rick doesn't budge and counter, despite being angry at his pricky answer. He remembers and follows Rionette's plan of being calm and observing during the first minutes of the bout. Raster attacks with a bit more powerful attack, but Rick is still adamant about observing. Elisa worries for him, but Brodston asks her to remember the power system, which she does. He then tells her that despite the low mana in Rick, they made sure to train the other areas, referencing back to the time he made run through a carnivorous forest with weights. He also credits the other members of the squad for doing their part, but believes it's his drive that allowed him to reach S-rank caliber, even though he's dumb as bricks. Raster goes overboard to spam his magic and insults, but they just tickle Rick. He then literally takes matters into his own hands and tries to punch him, only to get deflected. Rick then turns into Maharaga as he finally understands that Raster is just a spoiled, talented brat who's never trained in his life. Raster tells him to shut it and incants a powerful spell as his siblings cheer on, but Rick blocks it single-handedly. Mizet explains that Rick can easily control magic spells despite his low mana. Raster tries to speed blitz but has to reinforce his body with steel after Rick easily decks him. He then uses the classic villain dialogue on how he's tired from previous bouts and how Rick is really lucky, but Rick calls him out for his arrogance and being a blind asshole. Raster then questions why he's so strong without any mana. Rick then remembers his grueling training sessions of dying in volcanoes, bombs, and monsters' insides. Brodston then explains that he's strong due to this cycle of restoration and destruction, along with his healing magic. Rick then adds about how he was thrown off a cliff by Mizette, got crushed by a mountain through Alice Rhett, and got some woods from Rayonette. Raster doesn't believe his stories and asks him about his dream. He then tells him about defeating the legendary monster, Kaiser Alspiet, to some laughter. Broston adds that it's the squad's goal. Raster, though, tells him that it's a fairy tale before tangling him in vines and incanting an 8th level spell to unveil his mecha. Rick tries to use Airshot after being asked to grovel and asks him if he has trained with the mecha. After learning that he's only used it thrice, he tells him that he has trained with Airshot 1,000,000 times thanks to Brodston's time magic. Two then clash fist, with the obvious winner, Rick, managing to throw the blonde asshole out of the arena. Later, Rick meets up with everyone and tells them that he didn't realize he was that strong before thanking them. The squad is proud of him as well. Raster gets there and thinks that Rick would gloat about his victory, but Rick instead gives him a senior's advice to work on honing his skills. Raster then lays down the challenge of beating him on the next promotion exam before limping away. As the squad waits for them at the cafe, Rick and Rayonette wait for his results. Rayonette notices that he's pretty calm, but he tells him that he's reminded of something. He remembers his first time reading about Kaiser and wanting to become an adventurer. However, his Asian parents asked him to choose a different career path. Despite the parental pressure, Rick still screams that he will be an adventurer like he's Leffy, especially after learning he's special from the doctors. Days followed by years pass on as Rick and his friends wait for his special skill to activate, only to be met with failures. His friends ask him to be an adventurer as they get tons of dough, but he believes he's still special. Later, he lands a job as a receptionist, which makes his family happy. He works hard at his new job while still trying to unsuccessfully unlock his skills on the side. Time passes as he meets various people, including Elisa and her pointers. His friends get married and have kids while his parents get gray hair. He then finally learns that the doctor meant he was special only in medical terms, and finally puts the book to rest. Later, he gives Elisa some much-needed advice about the monster season. Zaid enters to tell him that he got promoted to B rank, which makes him envious. On his way home, he laments about his desk job before being distracted by monsters appearing out of nowhere. A giant troll appears after escaping from Twitter and sets its sights on a civilian. He tries to protect her, only for her to dissect the monster. The civilian then reveals herself to be an adventurer. He still drops her home, and they introduce each other. He also learns that she's the S ranker from the infamous squad. After learning that Rayonette hasn't laughed in 9 years, he tells her about his dream before asking if he can still be an adventurer. She tells him that his mana reservoir is empty, unlike her knockers, and tells him to give up on his dreams. He acts like he's okay before rizzing her up and getting invited to dinner as he has protagonist power.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
The next day, Rick is on Cloud 9, which worries everyone he knows, as he's going on a date. On his way back, Rick is prancing home when suddenly monsters attack again to ruin his evening. He heads out to see Rayonette has cubed the monster, only to see a horde coming towards them. She still makes easy work of them, only to crumble down as the new sensation triggers her PTSD. They're about to be pounced on when Zaid, Chun-Li, and Shaggy appear. They handle the new monster and its horde, but Rayonette warns them about the dragon. She then says how the dragon triggers her PTSD when it suddenly appears. The adventurers know they're no match for it and try to escape, only to get barricaded. They try to break it, but Rick loses it as he steps up to challenge the dragon, believing that he's gonna die as an adventurer. The others follow him and charge at the dragon, but are no match for its pure power. They get flamed and are about to be killed when suddenly Rick gets up, only to get crushed by it. Rayonette senses something, and Rick gets up as his skill is finally unlocked, making him happy. He then overpowers and beheads the dragon with ease. Everyone is shocked after what they've witnessed, but Rick passes out after raising his hand in victory. He wakes up after a week with a waifu by his side, who asks him to join their party as their goals align. Rick cries in happiness as he finally gets to achieve his dreams, albeit in a roundabout way. At present, Rick finally hears his name announced and becomes a full-fledged adventurer, finally able to raise his hand like he did during his childhood. The next day, Rick has to invite Lynx to meet with his party after his insistence. He then asks him to get there by giving him a map and to come prepared. Lynx follows the map and reaches the squad's base, only to be intimidated by a giant castle. He is intimidated by the doors as well, but is surprised to see such a beautiful interior. He asks Rick why he should come prepared, only for him to tell him that it lowers his chance of ending up in a casket. He greets Rionette and is reminded of his daughter when he sees a Liseret. Suddenly, she zaps a level 6 spell at him, only for Rick to block it. She tells him she did it cause he wouldn't play with her before, promising to stop after Rionette warns that she'll cut off her food budget. Rick then goes to play with her while Lynx is brought to the guest room. He goes to meet Mazette as he sees him toying around with the US Walmart arms supply. After introductions, he allows Lynx to try out his launcher, who is shocked at the destruction it can cause. He decides to steer clear of the American elf before he gets turned into one of the meat dummies. He wanders around to find Brotston in his library. After a discussion about how many books he has read, he asks the Skyrim orc to train him. Rick learns from Mazette that the two have gone to the forest for training in high spirits, which gets him worried. Meanwhile, Lynx gives his final speech to his daughter after getting dragged by steel balls before falling. He is luckily saved by Rionette, but gets dragged again after learning that Brotston is the one who killed Rick the most back then. Later, he's thankful that he's alive as Rick tells him not to trust his squad's word. He invites him for tea made by Rionette, which piques his interest regarding the two's relationship. Rick tells him that he's too old for her, but Lynx tells him that men their age should be like Drake, which convinces him. At dinner time, Lynx tells him to rizz her up and makes him run after her. He then talks about his hidden skill, but the squad says that it can only be activated under certain conditions. He tells them that he's envious, and Brotston tells him that he'd surpass even them if he can handle its activation. Brotston then asks him about the 6 infinity balls as they believe it will help them in beating Kaiser. They also believe that the stones are about to be activated and ask him if he knows anything. Lynx believes the legend to be true if they're talking about it and promises he'll tell them if he gets anything at the Central. Just then, Rick returns and tells him that he cannot rizz her up as she's an independent woman. Some days later, at the guild, Ray complains that she's an adventurer but is surprised to see the guildmaster panic. She sees that the squad grilling him has a weird lineup before being invited to join them. She is hesitant at first, but sees it as an opportunity to break free. Rick tells her that they're after the stone, which is supposed to be in that area. Ray still undermines him as an old guy, but is optimistic about slaying any monsters. They finally see the output of energy thrown by the stone. At the castle, Mazette is working on a device that could help him find some gooning materials.
Yeah, boy.
He tries to uplift Rionette's skirt and jacks off the machine, only to get it destroyed. On their way, Ray is scared to see wyverns, only to be shocked after seeing Brotston and Alice flinging them away. Rick takes her away as she's noisy, but they face a red one. He asks her to leave if she's a pansy, but she decides to stay and fight. She tries to act as his backup, only for him to kill it in one punch, making her question reality. The next day, Ray is still shocked from the day before, but it has given her inspiration to climb up the ranks, leaving the cleanup to the master. Back at the castle, the squad eyes the Crimson Jewel and uses that to search for the others, one of them being at Heractopia. Heractopia was founded by Alexander, the Fisting King, who organized tournament arcs in the capital, Knuckle Percy, and made it one of the largest nations. The squad gets there and is distracted by all the fistings going on there, but then locks in on their goal. They begin asking around about the balls, but everyone is afraid of Brotston. They decide to head out to the town hall, but get distracted by Johnny Sins trying to recruit a cat girl for his video. Brotston asks them about the stones, but Johnny challenges him to a size comparison. After losing to Brotston Jr., the two get asked about the other orb as Rick shows the Crimson Orb to them. The two know that they've seen the orb somewhere, when suddenly a parade to announce the Fisting Championship rolls around. They are shocked to see that the orb is used as a jewel for the championship belt held by Kelvin. Kelvin gets back to his gym after announcing the tournament and thinks about getting any strong contenders this year. The squad pulls up to his gym, where Brotston directly asks him to hand over his championship belt. Rick is worried due to his directness, but Brotston tells them the importance of the orb. Kelvin believes his story, but still refuses to hand it over, yapping about how it's the pride of the nation before challenging him to enter the tournament. After they leave, Kelvin talks about the power they hold and how he's excited to face the orc. The squad splits up after deciding Rick would enter from the Western League while Brot from the East and work their way up. Brot then calls his guide to help him. Rick also gets ready to give the mock test and faces his opponent, who turns out to be none other than Hatsune Miku. Both are shocked to see each other but get ready anyway. Meanwhile, the stands are filled with Diddy partygoers who are there for Angelica's assets but still root for her.
Look familiar?
After finding that her brothers are not there, he shows his new feet-swiping technique to her. He explains how he learned it, but she thinks it's disrespectful. But she tries to use her light speed only to fall on her flatboards. He swipes her like a guy trying Tinder for the first time, and after learning that she's not giving up, he readies to be serious, only for her to surrender. Rick enters the tournament and later takes Angelica to eat to prevent her from calling him Mr. 40s. They take her to the Cat Girls Cafe, who is saddened after learning that she won't be experiencing Bratson Jr. Angelica then explains to them how the tournament works and how she intends on winning, but she loses hope after finding that Rick will also be participating this year. In his first match, Rick faces Grit, who's known for being the weapon-using dickhead. Grit thinks Rick is a noob and tries to use a power boost against him, only to get his hand broken. Rick finds out that he used the impact stone and lectures him on how to use it efficiently before knocking him out with just shockwaves from his punch. Old Diddy gets excited about the tournament as Rick is declared the winner. As the tournament progresses, so does Angelica, which excites the Drake fans. The two congratulate her, but she still yaps on about how Rick cannot fight 40 matches in a day due to the distance between venues. Rick, though, screams at her to shut up before running away at super speed. Angelica is worried that he might patent the super speed, but gets more scared after Rionette takes her to see his match by hopping over the town. Angelica is still convulsing and misses Rick's win as he tells her that he needs to adjust his technique. He then runs to the next venue as the other two hop after him. Angelica is on the brink of death as Rick sweeps through various competitors in different venues with her trailing behind him against her will. Later, the two ladies rest at a cafe, and Angelica, shocked to see him easily fight through 40 men. She also learns about Brodston and is shaking on her winning chances. She hints at her feelings for Rick before asking if Rionette is okay with her and Rick's relationship rumors. After hearing her answer, she is shaken as to why she finds someone so dumb, so attractive when suddenly the waiter asks them for help. Meanwhile, Rick reaches the Cat Girl Cafe and shakes hands with Snape as he has never seen Harry Potter. He then sees that Snape is searching for Angelica, as he knows her family. He also learns that Snape is an early retired fighter who plans to send his person to the tournament before leaving with an eerie warning. Inside, he learns that Snape is not such a good person, as he has underworld connections, and his person is in the tournament through his sponsorship. He also learns where his harem is, as they're busy cosplaying as bunnies for advertisement. Suddenly, Angelica gets groped by a drunkard but gets called an ironing board. She beats him up, only for Rick to get there. She's embarrassed by seeing him, but he's more interested in dark elf balloons as he's a man of culture. At the gym, Kelvin is getting more excited after learning what the two did. The gym owner then remembers that he had the same look on his face the first time he recruited him, as Kelvin says how he has not felt like that in a long time. The next morning, Rick tries to ask Angelica about Snape, but she denies she knows anyone with such a name. As the Big Booba announcer starts their match, Angelica faces Lean Beef Patty and manages to win despite some setbacks. The two then sweep through others, but Angelica is strained. Later, they discuss strategy, but Angelica heads out without even hearing her opponent's name. She regrets her decision as Taylor Swift makes easy work of her despite her best efforts. Rick goes to meet up with her to ask her questions regarding her strategy, but she angrily leaves. He follows her and yaps on about using the correct strategy, but agrees to hear her out if she has something on her mind. She then tells him about how Snape is her fiancé who helped her family out in a dire time in exchange for her hand. She knows he did that to get into the noble pipeline, but Rick is still stuck at her choice of fiancé. She tells him that she found out that he's the tournament sponsor in his plan when suddenly they hear a ruckus at the bar. They get there to see Taylor get manhandled by Gith. He is pissed at the woman and thinks about doing something else with her, but Angelica steps in. He tries to punch her, but feminist icon Rick stops him. Snape also gets there and tells Gith to stop. He reveals that Gith is his brother and goes away. Angelica says that he's planning to fix matches through his sponsorship and get a ton of dough to marry her. So she plans to have him call off the engagement, but the chances are slim after seeing Gith. Rick then asks permission to train her, which shocks her. The two then get to boot camp as Rick trains her, similarly to how he was trained, with balls tied. He then makes her run miles without hearing her out, but is glad to hear his name being called. Rick is impressed as he recalls his death doing that for the first time. She is happy to know that she survived her first day, but he tells her that they'll be doing that all day, every day. 5 days pass, and Angelica runs away to a secluded cafe to get some peace, but as always, Rick appears from nowhere. But instead of scolding her, he tells her he understands her reasons for running as he also ran back in the day. He recalls how he died 2,000 times during practice, but after hearing Brotson's words about suffering, he decided to persevere. Angelica then tells him that she wants to be the first female knight in her family, and so she'll persevere as well. He then gets her to train under Rionette so she can turn her hand into a sword. Sometime later, Team Drake is shocked to see Angelica's transformation and her easy win against a favorite.
That's why he's the GOAT!
The duo is also happy but worried about her current state. Later, Angelica is worried as her image is tarnished due to her monkeyness. The two assures her that she needs not to worry since she won. Mazette and Alice get there to tell them how they were on a wild goose chase. He tries to riz the cat girl, but she's more interested in orc meat. The gang enjoys the dinner as they discuss the orb and motivate Angelica after finding out she's been training under the couple. Sometime later, the fisting tournament gets underway as the announcer declares the match card. Rick is happy to learn he won't be facing Brotston, but Angelica tells him how Snape has fixed the match in his favor by making sure Gith won't meet any strong opponents before the final. She also predicts that he'll bet against his brother in the final to grab a fortune, but she'll wreck his plans when she faces him. Rick, though, questions her plan's validity. Later, Kelvin meets up with the duo as he believes they're the challenge he has been waiting for. The owner then recalls Kelvin's love for making himself better after every loss, especially his first one, and his rise to the top 6 years ago. The owner is happy to see his spirit burning as well. The tournament gets underway as Gith makes short work of his opponent after humiliating him by taking his attacks head-on without flinching. Rick and Angelica notice that his amateur moves, despite managing to pull the crowd's attention to his raw strength. Angelica, Rick, and Broston steamroll through their opponents and settle to watch Kelvin's match. They notice that he can predict his opponent's move through his super smell, but he gets hit on purpose to play with the crowd's emotions. Still, he makes quick work of his opponent. The next day, Snape asks to join Rick in the splash zone. He tries to create some conversation with his teammates, but they call him out on his forced acting. He then quietly sits down and says that he's worried to watch his brother and fiancé duke it out. Before their match, Angelica meets up with Gith, who tells her that he'll go easy on her as she's her brother's fiancée. She then calls him out on his cocky facade, but he says that he's a born prodigy who won't be hitting her stomach as she needs to bear his brother's children, which pisses Angelica off. Their match goes underway as Drake shows his support for her. She tries to attack him, but notices that it is ineffective. After dodging his attack, she removes her magic and uses the mana inversion she learned from Rionette to slice him, shocking everyone. Snape explains how his body couldn't be sliced by swords, but she managed to. Rionette recalls how she showed her this technique, and the squad explains that she did it by concentrating her mana into her hand after rigorous training. She is happy for landing the hit, whereas Gith looks annoyed at his injury. Angelica begins spamming her slicer, but Gith gets more annoyed and begins to attack and lands a strong hit. He then tells his brother that he won't be holding back, and Snape just shrugs. She then uses her total speed, but Gith manages to copy her move and outmaneuver her. Snape glazes his stepbrother, saying that he retired after getting fisted by his stepbro. He also says that he hasn't done any match fixing, as he knows Gith will beat the odds while his wife gets humiliated and brings shame to the family name. The audience watches in horror as Gith screams at Angelica to give up while beating the stuffing out of her. He believes that an average person like her won't win against a prodigy like him, no matter the amount of training. Angelica still doesn't want to give up, scaling her resolve before throwing a punch. This angers Gith, who plasters her on the wall.
No! God, please, no! No!
And gets ready to pierce her when suddenly a shoe gets thrown at him. He then sees a barefoot Rick looking at him with sheer anger in his eyes. The two meet backstage as Angelica gets stretchered out of the arena. Gith gives him his shoes back and tries to provoke him, but Rick tells him he's going to kick his ass in front of the crowd and angers him. The next day, Rick wins his match in one strike and goes to check on Angelica, finding out that her life is thankfully not in danger. Brotston and Kelvin also pick up their respective wins, deciding the final four. The next morning, Rick returns after breaking some rocks to find Angelica there. He's glad to see her healed up, but tells her not to strain herself. Angelica, though, apologizes to him for wasting his time training her. She also has a broken spirit, questioning if her rebellion against her family is worth it, and thinks that marrying Professor Snape is not a bad idea. Rick then tells her to just watch his match closely to show her what she can achieve after not giving up. The two face off and Gith trash talks about humiliating Angelica. The match starts and Rick changes his facial structure while he talks shit about training. Rick provokes him, which works as he pounces on him, only to get a liver shot. Angelica is still surprised at his strength, but the gang explains that he used a precise chi attack on him. Gith then uses his dragon magic and unloads on Rick, but everyone notices he is consuming a lot of mana. Still, he manages to deal some damage after using Rick's technique on the spot. Snape provides his sympathy to Brodston as he believes his brother will win, but he ignores him to tell Angelica to observe. Rick finally tells him that he has lost his stamina and surprises him with an undamaged body. He then tells him that he had manipulated his body to get no damage. Gith takes offense as he believes he's been holding back on him, but Rick tells him that he has lowered his power level to Angelica. Everyone else then adds that it's a rematch between Gith and Angelica to show what she's capable of. Gith is visibly pissed and lunges to kill Rick with his steel fist, but he just breaks the technique. He explains that since Gith has never trained, he doesn't know a thing about getting tired. Snape is shocked to see Rick's talent, but his squad corrects him by saying he's actually lower than a commoner. Rick gives him a talk no jutsu about hard work and breaks his arm. He still yaps about how even prodigies should work hard and how Gith is just a giant lizard in a small pond. Gith goes beyond mad and transforms into a literal dragon, which Snape recalls are their ancestors. Rick starts to feel a little overwhelmed as Gith begins to counter his attacks. He praises his genetics for blessing him and questions what Angelica would do. He then says that she'd train beyond her limits and surpass everything as he uses light speed. Angelica gets up as she sees herself in him, recalling her childhood training, and screams that her scale tips to the side of surpassing expectations. Rick knocks Gith down and tells him to see the light, but he still charges at him while screaming commoner. He then finally gets put down after Rick uses the thread slicer on him to win. Rick then gives a thumbs up to Angelica, who returns the same as he is declared the winner. Angelica tells him that she'll train even harder to reach his level before thanking him. Rick is still humble and tells her it's nothing as the audience cheers for the old man. She tells Snape he is lost, but Snape tells them that he's morbidly happy to see his prodigal brother lose as he retired from fighting due to him. She also adds that he needs to annul their engagement and throw away his chance move up into nobility, but he seems genuinely saddened to not marry her. Kelvin has his final pep talk with his owner, who tells him not to worry about anything and to go all out. The announcer announces the two fighters and the team is surprised to see the loud cheers for Kelvin. Rick adds that he's the champion, but the champ is a bit worried about how he can create an opening as Brodston intimidatingly stands. The match gets underway as Kelvin tests out Brodston's durability by fisting him in a barrage before dodging his giant one. As he proclaims that he's his strongest opponent, Gith reappears and goes on a rampage. Snape says that it might be his dragon form as he attacks the audience. Kelvin is pissed at him for interrupting his match and gets rid of him in a single punch. Rionette observes that Kelvin might be S-rank, but the match gets rescheduled. Brodston, though, tells him that he sees doubt in his fists. The gang goes to a cafe to eat while Rick jogs to a faraway place to observe Rionette's mountain. He sees that Kelvin is training there as well. As he asks why he's overtraining, Kelvin asks him to be his sparring partner and attacks him. Rick, though, surprisingly, overpowers his punch and questions if his super smell is off. Kelvin then tells him that he used to love stacking bodies in the slum, and it was the same at first in the tournament. He then saw that the matches ended the same for him as a champion, making him focus more on training and keeping the owner happy. After hearing the audience was losing interest due to his monotonous matches, he adapted himself to get hit and keep the show rolling. So he has a habit of pulling back his punches. Rick assures that his match with the orc will be fun before running away. The next day, the stands are reinforced with defense magic and the match goes underway. Kelvin tries the same barrage but manages to move Brodston a bit through his spiral fist. After swatting him away, Brodston tells him that he heard everything about his showmanship from Rick and tells him not to pull his punches. Kelvin tells him that he cannot do that as he believes that the audience will find out he's faking it. Brodston understands and tells him he'll fight with only 2 fingers without moving an inch to even the playing field. Kelvin gets whooped by him despite his best offense, making him sad as he has to pass up on a strong opponent without going all out. Suddenly, the owner screams at him to fuck what others think and go maximum as he wants him to be seen as the strongest. Kelvin finally gets the push he was waiting for and makes Brodston block him with all his palms before being thrown. The audience begins gossiping about him holding back all these years, but Kelvin ignores them to show his magic skills. Angelica is surprised to see his species be good at magic, while Rick glazes him for honing his skills. Broston blocks his flames, while the owner is shocked to see that he can skillfully use magic. As Kelvin entangles him using forestry, Rick starts to get worried. The champ then enchants a powerful 8th level spell to the praise of the squad before summoning a giant meteor like Madara. Rick is scared, as Broston might stop holding back after seeing him go all out. The noble orc then easily disintegrates the meteor with a single punch before giving the quarter thumbs up. As the squad explains that it's his signal to go on the offense now, Kelvin finally feels fear and gets flunked by his punch's shockwave. Broston advances forward by not even flinching at the powerful magic thrown at him before throwing another punch. Kelvin is winded out from the punch but still goes for his barrage as he doesn't want to surrender. But as Rick notices, he finally succumbs to fatigue from all the magic used. He finally admits that there are stronger beings out there and thinks of losing. Suddenly, the audience loudly cheers him on despite the deceiving, and he pulls his final move from his spirit by combining all his previous ones into a single punch. Broston, though, is not affected as he asks him if he has had fun. Kelvin notices that he managed to move him a bit and tells him it's the most fun he's had in years. He then reciprocates with a respectful punch as Kelvin goes down with a smile on his face. The owner then says that he still has a long way to go to be the strongest fighter, but he's the best fighter in history. Broston is declared the winner, while Rick and Angelica wait for him backstage. Rick tells him that he'll withdraw, but his senpai looks forward to their match. Rick then starts balding as he experiences extreme stress. Meanwhile, Kelvin reads the news about his criticism for deceiving the audience. The owner tells him not to worry and asks about his new technique. He tells him that it was a spur-of-the-moment thing, and the owner tells him to master it to win the next tournament. As the two share a wholesome father-son moment, Broston gets there. He requests to heal him, but Kelvin denies it and talks about how Rick was correct in his assessment. Speaking about Rick, he has locked himself in his room. Snape is there to motivate him to participate, leaving after performing. Angelica tries her luck again, but leaves after he tells her to fuck off as a weakling. Mizette tells him that the boss's intention for training Rick so harshly was to find a brawling partner, as orcs bond through brawling. He and Alice then leave after telling him he can quit, but also understand his feelings. Rick recalls how Broston was the first person who told him to grind harder after finding he's a beta. Angelica is understandably pissed at Rick, but Mizette and Alice explain that his training to become a Sigma was hell on earth. They also tell her about his inherent skill and its complexity, making her kind of realize why Rick is pussying. Later, Rionette tells Rick to grow a pair. The finale starts with a grand spectacle as the Big Booba announcer showcases all the prizes the winner's gonna get. Rick puts up a front when his harem checks on him but is shaking. Rionette then finally whispers to him that if he doesn't pussify, she'll sit on his face, which gets him to finally get inside the ring. The fight begins and everyone anticipates to watch how it goes. Rick lands the first damage as he makes his senpai bleed. The squad explains how they both don't use magic, and it was from pure strength. The two then show the normies how it's done through a pure display of raw strength and speed. Angelica acts as the unofficial commentator and asks what Rionette told him. She tells her that they will be going to the hot springs if he wins. Angelica is embarrassed and hints that she will sit on his face, to which Rionette agrees. Broston comments on how he's fighting in such high spirits and begins his offense. Rick dodges his attacks impressively using chantless magic. He then deploys a reckless offense by countering his senpai's attack, which deals some damage. Broston then tells him that all the training has finally caught up to him and he's impressed. Rick thanks him but tells him that it's not enough as he wants to be his brawling partner. The orc is proud of his junior, calling him a full-fledged member of the crew. Broston then lets him in on the secret of the squad's formation. He recalls how he always felt different from his species since childhood. After learning to enlighten himself through books dropped by humans on top of added strength, he became the god of his clan. But this made him feel alone. He also recalls how he felt nothing but loneliness after losing his tribe, including his family, in a disaster. That night, he met Reinhardt, the author of the infamous Legend of Kaiser, who told him that the legend was true before bestowing his dream of defeating the legend on him. The two then went on to establish the Orichalcum Fist and recruit the current crew, but Broston still hadn't found someone to brawl with. So he devised his training plan, which he almost gave up on, until he trained Rick. At present, Broston believes he is yapping too much, but Rick is moved by the fact that he invested so much into him. He then gives him the quarter thumbs up, shocking everyone, including Broston. He also looks at Rionette as his face is not going to be a suitable face for sitting, but she falls for him even more. Broston then finally touches tips with him and accepts his duel. The two go at it like Dio and Jotaro with barrages of punches thrown. As Rick believes he can at least go all out for his senpai, Mizette teleports the audience to safety by using Alice's mana. Kelvin comes to ask him what he has done when suddenly the barrier breaks from their sheer testosterone. The squad notices that despite Rick's multiple landings, Broston's single punches deal more damage. As the stage flies away, so does Rick. Kelvin almost comes after witnessing peak manliness, while Rick remembers everything Broston did for him and stands up for the final exchange. The two get to blows again, but Rick gets punched through the arena. Everyone believes that it's over for Rick, but he sees that if his finger can still move, then so can he. Suddenly, pure energy is emitted as Kelvin and Angelica witness his inherent skill, the Reckless Soul, which could have been named the Rickless Soul. As Rick attains the Super Saiyan, the squad sees that Broston is surprised and happily reveals that they secretly trained him to at least control it to a point he can activate it through sheer will and manliness alone. As Super Saiyan Rick punches his senpai, Broston finally realizes that what he required was already there. Friends, and how he should stop being such an arrogant dipshit. The two then finally get to the deciding punch as everyone witnesses their manly aura. As the dust settles, both of them are still standing, all bloody and battered. Rick is still sad that he couldn't give his senpai the fisting he wanted despite going Super Saiyan, and falls. But Broston tells him that he earned this victory as his before falling as well. 3 days later, Rick wakes up to find himself to Rionette and the belt, but he also sees everyone there. Broston thanks the gang for going far and beyond to help him fulfill his dream after telling them that Rick is the true winner. Later, Broston takes the orb from the championship and also shows the replica gem they're gonna put instead. Rick learns that Reinhardt may not be such a legend after all, as despite having a mysterious ability to beat aging, he is still running away after missing his book's deadline. Later in the evening, Snape tries to goad Kelvin into becoming champion once again as Rick and Broston have vacated the title and deleted their registry, but he denies it as he feels undeserving. The next morning, Broston ignores the proposal to be both the husband of the cat girl and the boss of Johnny. He then looks proudly at his squad for packing stacks of food to share with the neighbors and claims to Reinhardt that he's fulfilled his dream. Later, Angelica drops off as she needs to go back home, but she intends on returning and training under Broston. Rick questions her sanity, but she claims that she'll surpass him as well. He then decides to run home by covering 2,800 kilometers. The gang also buffs up the horse as they also want to return faster. Angelica sensibly and finally calls out their bullshit skills. Meanwhile, Rionette asks Rick if he's going to take her to the hot spring as she's tired and is looking for a place to sit. He tells her that it is only possible if he has won, but his wingmen, Mizette and Broston, tell him that he did. Rick imagines the possibilities of a dark elf, but self-cockblocks. Seeing his fumbling, the wingmen challenge him to a race to the castle with a wager that if Rick wins, he can finally explore an elf cave. But losing means more training. Rick promises that he'll be Rionette's seat and goes after his boys while the ladies soon follow. As he runs, Rick finally looks at himself and how far he has come, especially with his dream of becoming an adventurer. He high-fives his past self as he questions why it's wrong to have a dream during his 30s. If you made it this far, you are a true fisting legend. Drop a RIP Snape in the comments to confuse those who didn't train hard enough to last this long. Please like and subscribe and enjoy this next video, my legendary fisting champions.